The sun was slipping behind the ridges when Daniel Rourke guided his horse down the long stretch of dry earth that led home. Every hoofbeat echoed through the empty valley, stirring up clouds of dust that glowed faintly in the dying light. The sky was the color of rust, and the land stretched before him like an old wound, silent, scarred, and stubbornly alive despite everything. His ranch, once a proud piece of fertile land, now looked tired. Fences leaned, the barn sagged, and the windmill groaned as if it had a soul that had grown weary of spinning for no reason. He swung off his horse and led her into the barn. The mare snorted, shaking her mane as Daniel brushed the dust off her back. He worked in silence. It was the only sound that made sense anymore. Ever since Sarah, his wife, had died 5 years ago giving birth to a child who never took a breath, Daniel had learned to live with silence. It had become his language, his prayer, and his punishment. He didn't expect anyone to greet him when he walked into the house, but that night, a soft voice called from near the fireplace. "You're late again, Clara." She was sitting on the floor beside the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her hair, long and dark, fell over her face as she stared into the flames. Daniel had found her 2 months earlier, half dead near the river after a storm. She'd been barefoot, bleeding, and terrified of every sound. He didn't ask who she was running from. The West was full of ghosts, men and women trying to escape something too painful to name. He'd brought her home because he couldn't stand the thought of leaving her out there to die. At first, she barely spoke. Her voice was a whisper, her eyes haunted, her hands shaking at every sudden noise. Daniel had given her a bed, some old clothes, and the quiet she seemed to crave. Gradually, she began to help around the ranch, feeding the chickens, fetching water, mending torn shirts. Her presence filled the empty spaces of the house without words. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't eat alone. Now, as he removed his coat and hung it by the door, he noticed how pale she looked, how her hands trembled even as she held them near the warmth of the fire. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She nodded too quickly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just tired," she murmured. He didn't push further. She'd been through enough. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long on the stove, the bitterness biting his tongue. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. But something felt off that night. Daniel couldn't shake it. Clara's eyes were distant, her breathing shallow. She kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone, or something, to burst in at any moment. He finally broke the quiet. "You've been looking pale lately. You need rest." Her lips quivered. "I can't rest," she whispered. "Not yet." The way she said it sent a shiver down his spine. "What do you mean?" Clara turned toward him then, her eyes shimmering with tears she could no longer hold back. Her hands clutched at her stomach as though she were trying to contain something breaking inside her. "I can't hold it in anymore," she gasped, her voice trembling, raw. "It's coming. I didn't want you to know." Daniel froze where he stood. The cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The words hung in the air like smoke. He understood them before she said another thing. She was pregnant. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. For a few moments, neither of them moved. The only sound was the fire crackling behind her, throwing orange light across her face. "Clara," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "How long?" Her tears came faster now. "Since before you found me," she whispered. "I thought, maybe it wouldn't survive. I thought I could hide it. I didn't want to bring more shame here." Daniel turned away, pressing a hand against the edge of the table. His mind filled with chaos, the memory of Sarah screaming in pain, the helplessness as she bled, the tiny still body in his arms. The same fear, sharp and suffocating, gripped him again. "You should have told me," he said quietly, though anger simmered beneath his restraint. "You shouldn't have kept this from me. I was afraid," she said, her voice breaking. "Afraid you'd send me away. I've got no one, Daniel. No one." He looked at her then, really looked, at the bruises that had faded but never disappeared, at the lines of sorrow carved into her young face. He saw fear, yes, but also a strange kind of strength. She had carried this burden alone, and now she was breaking under it. Lightning flashed outside, and a moment later, thunder rolled across the valley. The storm hit fast, hard, and unrelenting. Rain beat against the windows like a warning. Clara suddenly doubled over, a cry tearing from her throat. Blood spotted the floor beneath her dress. Daniel's breath caught. "God help us," he whispered. He dropped to his knees beside her, his rough hands trembling as he reached for her. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said quickly, already reaching for his coat. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No time," she gasped. "He won't make it through this storm. Please, don't leave me." Daniel hesitated, caught between terror and duty. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't know how to help. All he could see was Sarah again, her face white as snow, her hand slipping from his. His heart pounded like it would burst. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Clara's eyes locked on his. "Just don't go," she whispered. "Please, I can't do this alone again." That word, again, cut through him. Whoever had hurt her before had left scars deeper than the skin. And now, she was fighting for her life under his roof. He wanted to run, to escape the ghosts clawing at him, but something stronger held him there. The thunder cracked overhead, shaking the walls. Daniel tore strips from an old sheet, fetched water, and did what little he remembered from the night he lost Sarah. The memory made his hands shake, but Clara's screams forced him forward. Her pain filled every corner of the house, every inch of his soul. For hours, he worked by candlelight, drenched in sweat, praying to a God he'd stopped believing in. Each minute stretched like a lifetime. He begged under his breath, not for himself, but for her, for one more chance to do something right. When the lightning flickered again, it caught her face in a halo of tears and pain. "You're doing fine," he said, though his voice cracked with fear. She gripped his hand so tightly he felt her nails dig into his skin. Outside, the wind howled like 1,000 voices crying through the desert. Inside, there was only her, the sound of her breath, the tremor of her body, the echo of her whispered prayers. And then, suddenly, silence. The storm seemed to hold its breath. Clara slumped back, eyes half closed, her lips barely moving. Daniel leaned forward, terrified she'd stopped breathing. But then a small sound broke through, a faint, fragile cry that didn't belong to her. He froze. It was the cry of a newborn child. He looked down, and in that instant, time stopped. A tiny baby, red and trembling, gasping for life in his hands. Clara's tears mixed with the rain dripping from the ceiling. She smiled faintly, her voice weak. You did it," she whispered. Daniel wanted to answer, but the words died in his throat. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding, his mind drowning in the weight of what had just happened. He had done something he never thought he could do, something horrifying and miraculous all at once. And as the storm raged outside, he knew the world would never be the same again. The candle burned low, its flame trembling in the wind that slipped through the cracks of the old ranch walls. Daniel sat on the floor beside Clara's still body, the newborn wrapped in a worn blanket against his chest. The storm outside had begun to die, but inside the small house, the air still felt thick with thunder. He hadn't moved for what felt like hours. The baby's weak cries were the only sound that broke the silence. Each tiny breath reminded him that life had come, but at a price. Clara lay motionless near the hearth, her dark hair spread like ink across the floorboards. Her face was pale, peaceful even, as if she'd simply fallen asleep after a long, hard fight. Daniel wanted to believe that's all it was, that any moment she'd wake up, ask for the child, and smile that shy, tired smile she always gave when she was pretending she wasn't in pain. But he knew better. He could see the stillness in her chest, the absence of breath, the finality of it all. He whispered her name once, then again, as if the sound alone might call her back. But only the baby answered with a soft, mewling cry. His hands trembled as he looked down at the tiny bundle, her skin pink against the rough fabric of his coat. "You're all that's left," he murmured, his voice breaking. "She gave you everything she had." He rocked the baby gently, his tears falling onto her face. She blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, unaware of the grief she'd been born into. A part of Daniel wanted to scream, at God, at the world, at himself, but the sound never came. Instead, he rose unsteadily, carrying the child to the old bed in the next room. He laid her down carefully and covered her with Sarah's quilt, the same one his wife had sewn before she died. Then he returned to Clara's side. He didn't know what to do next. The house smelled of smoke, blood, and rain. His hands, his shirt, even the floor bore the mark of what had happened. It was as though life itself had demanded payment, and he was left holding both the miracle and the debt. He remembered Clara's final words, her voice faint as a breath. "Her name is Hope. Promise me you'll keep her safe." Those words wouldn't leave him. They became a weight in his chest, heavier than the grief itself. He sat beside her for a long time, until dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters and painted her still face in shades of gold and gray. When the sun rose fully, he carried her outside. The storm had washed the dust from the valley, leaving the air clean and damp. The earth was soft beneath his boots. Behind the barn, beneath a tall cottonwood tree, he began to dig. His hands were blistered and raw, but he didn't stop. Every scoop of dirt felt like another confession. He thought of Sarah, of the son he never knew, of the years of silence that had swallowed him whole. And now Clara, the woman he'd tried to save but hadn't been fast enough to help. When the grave was ready, he laid her down gently, covering her with the shawl she had always kept close. He whispered a prayer he barely remembered, something about peace, about mercy. Then he stood there a long time, staring at the mound of fresh earth, until the wind carried the first hint of a new morning across the plains. That night, when the baby cried again, Daniel woke with a start. His first instinct was fear, the kind that came from deep inside, the fear of losing again. But as he lifted the baby from the cradle, something inside him softened. She stopped crying almost instantly when he held her close. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, and for the first time in years, he felt warmth that wasn't from the fire. He fed her what little milk he could get from a neighbor's cow, and when she finally slept, he sat by her side and whispered, "Hope. That's what your mama wanted you to be. Hope for what's left of me." The days turned into weeks. The neighbors who came by with supplies whispered about what had happened, offering condolences mixed with superstition. Some said the ranch was cursed, that Daniel had brought death back to his home by saving the Apache woman. Others said it was fate, that no man could run from loss forever. Daniel said nothing. He kept to himself, working the land, tending to the animals, and caring for the child who had become the center of his world. As months passed, the valley began to heal. The rains came that spring, turning the parched earth green again. Wildflowers grew where the ground had been bare for years. Daniel rebuilt the barn, repainted the house, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he planted new crops. Each seed felt like a promise to both women he had lost, a quiet vow to keep living, to make something good out of the pain. Hope grew quickly, her laughter filling the empty rooms with a brightness Daniel hadn't known he needed. She had her mother's dark hair and a smile that reminded him of the woman he once loved. She followed him everywhere, to the barn, the fields, the riverbank. When she was old enough to ask about her mother, Daniel would tell her stories, painting Clara not as a victim, but as someone brave enough to fight the world for one more chance at life. He never told her about that night, the storm, the fear, his hesitation. That secret he carried like a scar he could never show. It haunted him in the quiet hours, when the wind howled through the valley and the fire burned low. Sometimes, he'd wake from dreams where he saw Clara again, her hand reaching out, her voice whispering, "Don't go." And every time, he'd whisper back, "I didn't. Not again." Years passed. Hope grew into a young woman, full of curiosity and light. The land flourished, the cattle multiplied, and the old ranch finally began to look alive again. Daniel's hair turned gray, his hands rougher than ever, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Hope found a letter tucked inside her mother's shawl, the same shawl Daniel had buried with Clara, or so she thought. But there it was, folded neatly, hidden in the lining. The letter was old, the ink faded, the handwriting rough but steady. It was from Daniel. He had written it years ago, during one of those sleepless nights when the weight of memory was too much to bear. Hope read it slowly, her eyes stinging with tears as she took in every word. "Greater than, if you ever find this, it means I've failed to tell you enough about her. Your mother was light in a world of darkness. She saved me when I didn't think I could be saved. But the night you were born, I did something I'll never forgive myself for. I hesitated. Just for a heartbeat, I thought of leaving. Fear does that to a man. But I stayed, and because of that, you're here. You are my second chance. Remember this, love isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to hold, even when it hurts." Hope folded the letter against her chest, tears falling freely. She stepped outside, the wind carrying the scent of rain again. The cottonwood tree behind the barn swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves whispering in the twilight. She knelt beside it, her hand resting on the ground where her mother lay, and whispered, "He kept his promise, Mama. You gave him hope, and he gave it to me." As the sun disappeared beyond the hills, the ranch glowed with the soft light of evening. Somewhere in the quiet, Daniel's old voice hummed the tune Sarah once sang long ago, and hope joined him, her voice rising gently through the air. The past, the pain, and the love that endured through both, it all lived there, in the heart of that lonely land, finally at peace.